teaches, should I teach Islamic transaction, this type of transaction, how to do a loan. So he goes, don't teach transaction, teach ethics, because that's sort of like a step before. So here we've done nearly 28 chapters, about halfway through the book, of why we earn halal and the importance of earning, and he dispels. So it's based on Imam Muhammad's book, Imam Muhammad ibn Hasan al-Shaybani, rahimahullah, Imam Abu Hanifa's student. So, and then Imam Sarakhsi came and he did a commentary sharh on this. So that's what the book is. And then Imam Sarakhsi was later on. A lot of Imam Sarakhsi's books are done from jail. He was done studied one of his books last year, a chapter of one of his books. It's like an encyclopedic work. That book is all dictated from inside he was imprisoned in a well. His students sat at the mouth of the well and he dictated the whole book. And it's like a reference book for the jurist today. So anyway, so Imam Sarakhsi is the one it's a translation of Imam Sarakhsi explaining Imam Muhammad on the importance of light. Somebody asked Imam Muhammad to write a book on zuhud, turning away from the heart, from the dunya and so forth. So he said, I've already written, it's called Kitab al-Kasb, the book of earning livelihood. And all those arguments of why you shouldn't earn and like to be pious and so forth, he smashes all those arguments. He goes, that's not from Islam, that's not from the teachings of the prophets. You're supposed to go earn, and that's part of your deen, to go earn and make effort for a halal livelihood. Anyway, so we were, and then right at the end, so far we read to, then he diverts for a few chapters to talab ilm. So the whole book is about talab al-Kasb halal, or talab al-Kasb, seeking livelihood or halal livelihood, obviously. Then he diverts to seeking knowledge, because that's another type of seeking that in Islam that we have, that people will travel days on end to seek knowledge of hadith or any other Islamic science. To travel, and we read about those and the duties related to that. So now we're sort of back to the earning livelihood. So the Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah, matters by which the bodies of the children of Adam are supported. Al-umur allati biha qiwamu abdan bani Adam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created the children of Adam alayhi salam as creatures whose bodies do not endure except for four things. They not endure except by four things, namely food, ta'am, sharab, drink, clothing, libas, and shelter, al-kin, which or dwelling, maskan. As for food, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we do not give them bodies that ate no food, and they were not immortals. And He subhanahu wa ta'ala says, eat of the good things that we have provided you. As for the drink, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, and we made all things living from water. And He subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and eat and drink. As for clothing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O children of Adam, we have sent you clothing to cover your private parts and for adornment. And He subhanahu wa ta'ala says, wearing a finery at every place of worship, and eat and drink without being immoderate. For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not love the excessive. As for the need of shelter, it is because they were created as creatures whose bodies cannot bear suffering of heat and cold, and do not endure the extremes of either. For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, humankind is created weak. Hence a person needs to ward off the discomfort of heat and cold from himself, and so that his self may endure, that he may honor with it what he assumed of the trust of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But he cannot possibly do that except by having shelter. Therefore, because of this significance, shelter becomes on par with food and drink. So one of the economics lecturer, he said, like this is we're going to the basic need level. What a human being needs. He said, as an economics teacher, he goes, it's basically a bowl of rice, a sheet of cloth, and a piece of tin to protect you from the elements. He goes, that's actually the needs, like sort of bare minimum needs of a human being. We should think from that term, start from there, because like when you hear shelter, it's mini townhouse in Doncaster, like maybe for us, whatever you might think, but we have to sort of like remove a little bit and get a reality check of what is actually the needs of a human being. Wisdom in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordaining the livelihoods of servants through apparent causes. This is the next section. Imam Muhammad says, and He has ordained for them livelihoods through causes in which there is profound wisdom. Asbab means. This means that nobody is capable of learning about all things that he needs in his lifetime, and even if he has to apply himself to that task, he would exhaust his lifetime before learning about them all. And what he has not learned, he cannot obtain for himself. Whereas the well-being of their livelihood, the masalih and ma'isha, is conditioned on this learning. Therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has facilitated for each one of them the learning of a kind of all that which they need to learn, so that they can attain to that which you need of that kind of by having knowledge of it, and so that others may also attain to what they need and that by having knowledge of it also. The Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has indicated this in the statement, believers are as a building, part of which support the other. The elucidation of this is that the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we have elevated some of them to ranks over others, so that some may employ others as workers, but the mercy of your Lord is better than what they amass. This means that the poor is in need of the wealth of the rich, and the rich is in need of the work of the poor, and here likewise the farmer is in need of the work of the weaver, and he may obtain clothing for himself, while the weaver is in need of the work of the farmer in order to obtain food and cotton from that which comes clothing for himself. Permissible earning is in the category of cooperation and devotion and obedience. Moreover, each of the two in which they render a work is assisting the other in something of devotion, qurba, and obedience, ta'ah. Interesting that the way he looks at economy, different trades and jobs, how they're supporting each other, that they're not just supporting each other, like we think of this is like material or capitalism or something, we might use a modern term to it, but he's saying that actually these two are supporting each other in devotion, qurba, and obedience, ta'ah. For rendering devotion is attained by this cooperation arising out of each one's respective work. It is included in the meaning of their statement, the meaning of the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and help each other in kindness and conscience. And the Prophet ﷺ says, verily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is at the assistance of the servant as long as the servant is at the assistance of his Muslim brother. He's doing his business and he's providing a service to the community. By providing that service in which is his livelihood, makes money out of it. If he's helping society with it, through bringing food to that country or importing, let's say, clothing or whatever it may be, then he's actually helping people of that community, right, by bringing the goods. It is the same whether he renders that work for a compensation he has stipulated or without compensation, right? For if his objective was that when what we have explained, then there is in this work the means of obedience. Because of the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, verily actions are by intentions, and for every person is only what he has intended. If a worker, the amil, intends by his work the capacity to render obedience or to enable his brother to do so, he will be rewarded for his work in accordance with his intention, and his work is then on par with that of the married couple, right, when they intend by their deed the seeking of children and the proliferation of the servants of Allah. He gives another fuqaha, these ulama, they try to find another case that by marrying there's intimacy, there's enjoyment in that type of relationship on the apparent. But if by doing that, they're actually rewarded, as Rasulullah has told us in the hadith. Here as well, on the zahir, the job, the worldly job, can be seen as it's dunya. This is a dunya job. But it depends on the intention and what they're doing with the job. And the intention changes everything, right? Even that worldly job, it changes the nature of that work. Similar, it gives the case to compare a husband and wife getting married. There's the obvious thing. There's an enjoyment and so forth in getting married and having companionship and so forth. That seems worldly, but intention is right. Then it's rewarded for it. So, and by trying to have children and the proliferation of the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the community of Rasulullah, the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for them both is the reward for their endeavor, even though that deed was originally for the fulfillment of their desire. But by virtue of the intention, it comes to have the significance of devotion, in essence, aslan, while the objective of their realizing their desire becomes only secondary, tab'an. And this is its exemplar. The problem of provisioning, eating and drinking. Imam Muhammad says, if they abandon eating and drinking, then they have disobeyed, for in doing so there is destruction, talaf. This means that since the self, the nafs, does not normally endure without eating and drinking, the one who refrains from doing so is killing his own self. Whereas Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and do not kill yourselves. Such a person exposing his self to destruction, halak. Whereas Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, do not invest in ruin by your own hands. After partaking of an amount of that which he keeps his body and soul together, it is recommended to partake of an amount by which he is fortified to render obedience. For if he does not partake, he'll weaken and may be incapable of rendering obedience. The Prophet ﷺ says, the strong believer is dearer to Allah than a weak believer, and in both there is goodness. I don't need this, maybe you don't need this, some of us don't need this. Some of us have to go the other way. We're becoming weak by eating too much. you can go, you get sicknesses and trouble carrying yourself from being overweight. Indeed, the earning of that by which a person is fortified to render obedience itself obedience. And this earning is recommended in order to bring about obedience. And Abu Dharr radiallahu anhu has pointed to this fact that when he was asked about the superior works, and he said prayer and eating bread. Who's being asked? Abu Dharr radiallahu anhu. And he is known among the companions as the one who has the most zuhud, he's known for very he was so strict that he was told to live outside Medina Munawwara in the time of Osman, because the wealth came in the time of Umar radiallahu anhu started, and then Osman radiallahu anhu was really you could see it. So I think he was the one that came into a masjid and they were using a bamboo stick or something to measure the foundation to make it like in Sham, right, to make the Masjid Nabawi, and he's picked it up and threw it outside the mosque, and he said, not in my lifetime, some Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu calculated how much barley he ate in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it was 3.5 pounds or something per week of barley, and he will not go more than that for the rest of his life. They didn't want to lose how they were with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, but because now Osman radiallahu anhu is dealing with people, they're not all Sahaba, they haven't gone through that, they've only seen futuhat, they're not going to be able to do this. So he became he used to reprimand Osman radiallahu anhu. He couldn't live among the Muslims anymore because it was so different to the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Abu Bakr and Umar radiallahu anhu. Imam Muhammad says, it has been transmitted from Masruq radiallahu anhu, that from other than him, the one who is hard pressed but yet refuses to eat and then dies, he will enter the fire. The meaning here refers to the partaking of carrion, al-mayta, for in times of emergency, prohibition is lifted and is rendered permissible. When the ruling regarding carrion is this, though, it is prohibited in other than emergency situation. What do you suppose to be ruling with regards to permissible food? And covering the private parts, Imam Muhammad says, the covering of the private parts is an obligation due to the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wear your finery at every place of worship. The meaning here is that the covering of the private parts for the sake of the prayer. Do you not see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala singles out the mosque for mention, though more people are in the marketplaces than in the masjids? Thus, there is no benefit in singling out the masjids for mention except that the purpose here is the covering of the private parts for the sake of the prayer, and this shows that it is among the conditions of the prayer, hence it is obligatory. And if the meaning was the covering of the private parts for the sake of people, then the command is in truth also obligatory in nature. And if the person is alone in his house, then he's recommended to cover, because of what has been narrated, that when they mentioned in the presence of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam the matter of the covering of the private parts, it was said to him, what do you think if one of us was alone? And which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Allah is more entitled to be shown bashfulness, haya, modesty too. I just finished these two last sort of sections. This is the obligation of providing containers to transport water to women. This is because women are in need of water for ablution, al-wudu, and drinking, and even if they do tayammum for dry wudu, dry ablution, tayammum, they still need to drink water, and it is not possible for them to go out and draw water from rivers, wells and ponds, for they are commanded to stay in their homes. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and settle down in your homes. Hence it is incumbent on the men to bring them these, for the Lord charges them with meeting their needs, such as provisions, al-nafaqa, and the water is like Imam Muhammad is going to the bare minimum, but he's explaining that these are the responsibilities of provision of these, getting clothes, getting food, and he gives example of to eat bread, the bare minimum. You need to, these are obligations in Islam. These are not optional. You have to attend to these. And it is not possible for the men to bring the women water with their palms. Hence, they cannot avoid providing containers for this purpose. For that, without which a duty, al-mustahaq, cannot be discharged. So, you're responsible to make sure the water bill is paid. This is extended today. That's, as a man, you're responsible because that she needs that for her salat, that she doesn't have to go elsewhere in the old days to a well or something to go out of the house, because she's obliged that the best hijab for a woman is the home. That's actually the first hijab. When she goes out of the house, then she covers up. That since that is a thing, then now you're obligating her to go out of the house where she's not required. All the duties, like pick up and drop off for kids, that's the responsibility of the husband. That's an outside duty, like school pick up, drop off. That's not the responsibility of the lady. That's the responsibility of the father. Like we all looking at each other, like, because it's during work time. But actually, it's not her duty. It's a duty of every job outside the house is a responsibility of the man of the house. Imam Muhammad says, and whoever does anything of what has been mentioned, he's commanded to complete it because of the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And do not be like those who break what she has spun after it is strong into untwisted strands. This is a parable mentioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in regards to someone who initiates a devotion but fails to complete it, like the woman who begins spinning but then aborts it, resulting neither in something spun nor something of the original cotton. And this is the last section, warning against abstaining from eating, drinking, and taking shelter. Whoever abstains from eating, drinking, and taking shelter until he dies has made entering the fire incumbent on him, for he has killed himself on purpose. It is as if he has killed himself with a piece of iron. The Prophet ﷺ has said, whoever kills himself with a piece of iron, meaning commits suicide through a weapon, right? Then it is that very piece of iron in his hand, and he'll be stabbing himself in the fire of hell. There are two ways of interpret the above mentioned words, which Imam Muhammad said. One of which is that he mentioned those words in the manner of giving a warning, ala sabil tahdid, that this is a tahdid, this is like a warning, while rendering implicit in his statement the sound meaning, which is that he meant the entering, which is the expiation of an oath. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, there is not one of you but who will come to that point of hell. It is determined necessity for Allah, which is meant by coming to that point is will enter the fire, according to the people of the Sunnah and the community, al-Sunnah wal-Jamaat. To that which, meaning that this person actually will not, there's a debate about, does he enter the Jahannam, right? If he's still a Muslim, then does he enter? So there's a discussion about committing suicide and so forth. To that which is meaning is to explain about the requital of his deed. That is, that the requital of his deed is entering the fire, but that is by the will of Allah Most High. If He wills, He forgives him out of His bounty. If He wills, He enters it into fire out of His justice. This is comparable to what is said in the explanation of the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then his reward is hell, wherein he will remain. This will be his reward if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so rewards him for it. However, He is most forgiving, most generous, showing His graciousness through forgiveness, al-afu, and He does not make abiding in the fire of hell for any one of the believers. Anybody who's a Muslim, no matter how big the sin is done, the major sins, the Aqeedah of Ahlul Sunnah Jamaat is separated from many sects, historical deviant sects, that a Muslim, regardless of his sin, even if he goes to Jahannam, eventually will enter Jahannam. He will not be in Jahannam forever. A mu'min will never go into Jahannam forever. This is one of the side masala mentioned about salat. The Hanbali madhab that I follow is the most strictest regarding this. And a person who abandons salat, but there are conditions for that. The conditions of declaring someone as a kafir because of abandoning salat is not to be, this is in the 90s especially, it was a mess in Melbourne. So many families were messed up because of this masala. Husband doesn't pray, he's a kafir automatically. No, the hukum, my teacher Dr. Mutlaq explains this in his dars, Hanbali alim from Kuwait, and he explains, then Hanbali explains this. There are 5 conditions for this. The hadith is taken in the context of the rest of Sharia, that on major sins we don't do takfir, kaba'ir. If someone does salat, this is not behaving a Muslim, but in a Muslim country, he's taken before a qadi. He's arrested, and then the qadi the salat is presented for him to salat, and he still refuses to do it. Then the hukum murtad applies, because now the hukum murtad is applied to this person. This is not for board of imams or ANIC or AFIC or ICV or everybody. Any of our bodies or Masjid UMMA Centre committee gets together and says, well, this person doesn't pray, he's tariq salah, abandon prayer, give the fatwa of hukum of a kufr on that person. That's not in Australia. It's not even applicable. You can't even do that in Australia. In Melbourne, husbands were saying, and there was people, I don't want to say sheikhs, but so people were saying, they said, yeah, the nikah is invalid, and she gets remarried to somebody else. So this happened. And no Sunni school, classic school, has ever, none of the 4 madahib in fiqh, because those are the 4 legitimate schools, no school has ever accepted this, that this nikah will never be valid, because she's still married to the first husband, and she's committing zina, right? So this is like, when I mentioned this right at the end, because this is as he mentioned, Allah's forgiving, number 1. Number 2 is that we as Ahlul Sunnah wal Jamaat, one of our criteria that identifies Ahlul Sunnah wal Jamaat, yes, there are things that are legitimate things that make people kafir, like someone, like for example Qadianis, they say that there's another prophet after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. 100% clear cut, there's no ifs buts about it. Somebody doesn't claim that he's a kafir, themselves also become kafir. There's clear things that someone denies akhirah, someone denies malaika. There are clear matters in deen that somebody, even if he says everything else and just denies this, he's still out of it. He denies one ayat of Quran, his iman is not accepted. So this is, we're very clear cut on that. But then there are things like major sins. Major sins are like zina and drinking and so forth. This is not, you cannot make takfir on this, based on this. It's very bad. This is severe punishment mentioned. Someone doesn't pray salat, is doing a major sin. And it doesn't behove a Muslim to be like that. But to take this from the category of into kufr, this is a leap. Like this has to be a leap, man, and it's going against all the usul of deen, all our principles of our sharia, that we're actually going into a category we're pushing something. Yes, the hadiths are there, but this is a very literal understanding of the hadith. Similarly, he's trying to explain the hadith of the suicide here as well, explaining that as well. The narrations mention for what purpose? Abstaining from eating and drinking and taking shelter. That these things you're required to acquire them, and abandoning them, you're committing and if you were to die because of this, it's like committing suicide. Like that's the whole point of mentioning the narration. May Allah subhanahu